Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Mirror of Intimacy, Daily Reflections on Emotional Erotic Intelligence. I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, and our topic today is projection. Today being Monday, February 3rd, the first day of this month where we celebrate love in all of its forms, but typically we're celebrating romantic love. So as usual, if you have questions, you can chat them or type them into the chat box. If you want to send them privately, you can send them to Melisa@centerforhealthysex.com. And then she will type that into the chat box also. But just remember that if you type a general chat into the box, your name comes up or whatever your Zoom name is. So we can't completely protect your anonymity on this end. So this is a topic that I really like and I think is quite interesting because I think it ties into a topic I've been very interested in recently, which is self-denial and how we trick ourselves. And projection is generally thought of as a defense mechanism where we don't really want to look at ourselves. We want to blame the person outside of us for their behavior, even though we're constructing them in fantasy the way we want them to be, not the way they actually are. And so these are very curious little nuances of the human being because we have these big brains, because we have these prefrontal cortices, we're inclined to really distort things sometimes as opposed to being in direct reality. And so we'll talk more about how that happens and what we can do about it. But today's quote, there were two quotes actually, because there was a quotation in the email that went out. We have a different quotation from the book, and this one is from Robert Johnson, who says, "If one person is in love and the other not, the cooler one is likely to say, 'We would have something better between us if you would look at me rather than your image of me.'" And I think that speaks to projection, that rather than really seeing the person for who they are, we are seeing them the way we would like them to be. And in this case, the person is saying, we'd have something better between us if you would actually see me. You're less likely to be angry or upset or disappointed or resentful if you see me for who I really am versus your fantasy projection of who you'd like me to be. So let's take a look at that. So one of the things that projection does is it has us unleashing our fantasies onto another. And this can happen when we meet somebody. We just have that initial jolt or attraction, and we want them to be somebody who keeps that initial jolt or reaction going for a lifetime, which is certainly a fantasy. So we're not really seeing who they are, and when they show up in a way that we don't like, we react to this altered image of them as if it's reality. So if I meet you and I'm enamored by you and I think you are the person of my dreams, and then you do something in a conversation I find offensive because you're less than perfect, like you look at your cell phone or you drop something, and I get resentful or I get affected by it in a negative way, it's because I'm not allowing your humanity. I need you to be this actor that I've cast in my play as the hero or heroine of my romantic story. And we embellish these roles with details from our own past, often from our own repressed or dissociated traumas. So if, let's say, you're a female and you had a father that was abandoning, either emotionally or physically, and you meet someone and you really need them to be your hero or your proverbial knight in shining armor, someone who's going to save you, want you, love you, regulate you, soothe you. And we project all of that onto this person in front of us. Let's say it's a male. That person is automatically being set up to fail us because nobody can possibly live up to our expectations. No one can possibly know what our needs are. No one can possibly know what our wounds are and what gaps they're supposed to be filling in unless we tell them. So if somebody's irritating us and we're pointing a finger at them, it's because we're not seeing that these are the exact negative traits we have in ourselves that we disavow or we disown. So it's really easy to ferret these things out by looking at your judgments of other people, because we are self-referential creatures. We're always looking back on the self and putting that out into the world. And so if I don't like someone because I don't like the car they drive, or I don't like their manners, or I'm judgmental about their figures of speech, I'm probably treating myself as harshly, and then I'm projecting that out on to the world around me. And so when we start to look at how negative we can be, how judgmental we can be, how many expectations we have of other people, or the assumptions that we make about others, then that is really a microscope inside our own minds. And all of that is what we do to ourselves, because we will then judge ourselves, have expectations of ourselves, denigrate ourselves in the way we talk to ourselves if we fall short. And so we can start to see the ways in which we were programmed, and then the way that programming kind of spews out on all the people around us, whether they are love objects or bosses or friends. So if our own sexual needs are being neglected by a partner who is, let's say, too brusque or mechanistic, or we think they're not adventurous enough, we've probably had something to do with the choice of that person. We've had something to do with the ways in which they're showing up, because we haven't been in a clear or constructive conversation. We're just judging that person doing the best they can, hopefully. So when we do that, the converse of that is if we become unduly enamored with someone, like we really put them on a pedestal and we think they're the one, and they're just mirroring the positive qualities in ourselves sometimes that we haven't been able to own. So all of this goes to say that love can be incredibly narcissistic. I can say, I love you because I want you to be just like me. I want you to like what I like and know what I need every minute of the day and attend to me in a certain way, because it's all about me, me, me. And in love, we want to be loved. We want to be taken care of. We want to be seen and tended to and heard. It's inherently self-organized. But it can't be a one-way street. We have to be able to give to our partners if we're going to receive that much also. So that it is a giving and receiving, a back and forth between the two, not just a one-way street. So does anybody have any thoughts or questions about that sort of section of what I've been talking about? This idea that we take the contents of our mind and we put it out on others and we hope that they'll fit the bill. It's sort of like saying, hi, I think this shirt would look great on you, and I made it for you, and I made it in the dimensions of which I want your body to look like, and you put it on and it's too small or too big, and we get upset about it because it isn't really tailored to you. Hi, Eric. Eric writes, what's the difference between well-discerned wisdom and projection? Well, I think this has to do with a discernment in our own selves. And when we can start to track down into our own bodies of what feels right to us and what doesn't, and we also start to know our own minds, the way that we construct fantasies about what we want the other person to be, a projection, then we start to recognize, oh, I know what this is. This is my wisdom speaking. I've met people like this before, and I see my tendency to want to aggrandize that person or put them on a pedestal or make them more than they are, and I'm not going to do that again. So I'm either not going to go out with that person again, or I'm going to dial my expectations way back, and figure out who they are, as opposed to ladling on my projections of them. And sometimes when we meet people who aren't well, or they go overboard in the snow job department, or looking good, or being seductive, it's very easy for us to align with our projections and not use our wisdom and our good sense and say, wait a minute, this is too good to be true. This person's, just perfect, and there's no such thing as perfect. So where's their shadow side, and how am I going to pay attention to the red flags and the yellow flags along the way? And someone says, how do I know if I'm projecting onto someone I'm dating? Well, I think that goes to the next thing I was going to talk about, is that we know we're projecting onto someone when we're looking through sort of a veil of gauze and starry-eyed, and we're not really hearing what they're saying. We're just so enamored with how they look, or the way they're holding their fork, or the way they're talking to the waiter. And I think in those moments, we have to get ourselves to snap out of it and to ask our friends and ourselves to be really brutally honest with what is actually going on in the moment. And that start to intervene on these projections. So we can't read other people's minds. We can't predict the future. And so the most reliable path to clarity is to listen for the truth, to ask our friends and lovers to tell the truth, the unvarnished truth, and to be able to tolerate it and handle it, and not get caught up in some idea or fantasy about what's going on. And someone says, what are some of the tools we can use to become more aware of our projections in the moment, identify the root, and then handle it appropriately? Well, I think one simple tool is really just to put both feet on the ground and to breathe and to ask yourself, is this true? Or am I getting ahead of the conversation and ahead of the person because I'm so swept up in how good I feel in their presence? And can I really listen for and pay attention to who they really are, not who I want them to be? And this is not only playing out when you're dating somebody and early on. When you're in a long-term relationship, this becomes even more essential, I think, to the longevity of the relationship and actually the sexual attraction in the relationship. Because it's very easy to get bogged down into the familiar, the annoyance you feel with someone, the tone of their voice, thinking you already know what they're going to say. That sort of narrowing down of the person and projecting onto them the worst in them, or what you feel is the worst in them, instead of saying, wait a minute, how much of this is just my reactivity and my judgment and my assumption about what's going on? And can I take a deep breath and notice that I'm getting tight internally and that I'm doing that? And start to be more mature and respectful, and instead just be quiet and listen to what the person's saying. And that way you are identifying the root, which is your own internal activation and the story you're telling yourself. And then you can have awareness about, is this really true? Or am I acting immature in this moment? Or am I reacting unnecessarily? And someone writes, my sex addict husband manipulated, intimidated, blamed, and projected his guilt and shame onto me. This seems like a different sort than when you're talking about. How does one find forgiveness around this, and how can I call him on it? Well, certainly when addicts are in active addiction, they are going to project all of their guilt and shame onto their partners. And in fact, they blow all of their anxiety through the partner and blame and shame them. Because that's what they're actually feeling. And that's a violent, aggressive form of emotional abuse that takes place. And it is a very primitive survival mechanism for distorting the truth. It's self-denial, and then it's deceit, and it's deceit with power and control laden into it. So that is a little bit different than the kind of projection I'm talking about right now. You're accurate about that. And so The only way you can find forgiveness for this is if he starts to take responsibility for it and he makes amends to you for it, and more importantly, he stops doing it. And when he stops doing it, it's going to take a long time for you to trust again. And so this is a long-term process. And then someone writes, what if your spouse or lover consistently sees negative rather than the positive? Would you still ask them for their opinions? I would say no, I wouldn't. And I would sit down and have a constructive conversation with them and say, look, I have this experience of you that no matter what I do or say, you always see the glass half empty. There's something about you that I find to be judgmental and critical of me, and I can't help but wonder if that was the household you grew up in. And are you willing to take a look at how negative I perceive you to be? And I wonder if other people have given you this feedback that you're quite negative. And if he or she says no, then I would say that I'm going to ask you to please not give me your opinion about certain things, because unless you have something positive to say or supportive to say, it's not helpful to me. And that's a way for you to handle it. And then the same person's asking, are we always narcissistic when we've fallen for someone? And no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that love inherently or implicitly seems to be a narcissistic proposition, because we want to fall in love with someone who's a reflection of the best in us, or what we would like to be. And once the gloss of limerence and love have faded a little bit, then you really get to see who that person is. And hopefully they're really seeing who you are too, because we're not perfect either. And that's part of the problem here, is everybody looking for perfection. Let's see. Someone writes, where's the line between seeing the potential in someone and hoping they'll be the best person they can be versus making excuses for them for when they're not perfect? And so I think we've covered some of that, but yes, I think none of this is black and white or cut and dry. There's no real roadmap for this other than your own internal cues, which is where I started with Eric's question, is that you have to get very conversant, first of all, in your own impulses, your feelings, what you're noticing in your body, what you know your tendencies are, what you know your issues are. This was why long-term therapy or some place of self-reflection where you get to actually know yourself and learn about yourself is important before you start dating, because otherwise you'll just load the dating situation and that poor other person with all of your issues and expect them to have to sort it out. So we have to sort it out first before we start getting in relationship with other people. So it's perfectly fine, and it's actually healthy to see a person in moderation, that they're not perfect, but they're good enough. And yes, maybe they forget to call you back, but they've got a good excuse for it, and that's the end of it. They don't chronically not call you back and always have excuses for it. Or they forget to do something they say they were going to do, and they apologize and you move on, and that happens on occasion. It's not a big deal. But you see that that person has really good qualities, and they could be more punctual, and you believe that they could be less forgetful over time, and they're really earnestly working on it. That's when you know that the person is good enough. When you see their behaviors where they're trying to course correct the thing that they need to work on, because we all certainly have our issues. And that's different than going out with someone and you're constantly making excuses for them for their lack of perfection, because you so desperately need them to be what you want them to be, because you're desperate to be in a relationship with someone. That is, detrimental to you, and it's detrimental to the person. It's unfair to them, because you'll end up resenting them and even hating them at some point, and they won't understand what went wrong because they're just doing what they do. So giving people constructive feedback, being honest about how you express yourself, how you want other people to express themselves, is the best thing that we can do. So when you start to take people at their word, that means that you are respecting them and you're mature. And even when that person is not doing what they say they're going to do, when you say, oh, this person really doesn't show up because they're impaired in some ways, that's being respectful of their process and where they're at. And that may be a time that you break up with them and say, look, this actually is not working for me. I don't see that you want to take measures to change this, and this is really a deal breaker for me. I can't live with somebody who is just chronically late, uninterested in the conversation about it, not willing to look at why they do that, and I just don't want to live with that anxiety. It's too much for me. So if I'm dating somebody and I'm 3 months in, that would be a reason for me to say, I'm out. I can't handle this. There can be certainly more egregious things than that too, but that's when it's time to be honest about it, because you're respecting the other person, you're respecting yourself, and it's mature. Rather than letting it go on and then hating the person for it and berating them and, you just being, angry all the time and all of that. It's completely unnecessary. So instead of creating chaos and misunderstanding as projection seems to do, this way of being respectful and mature encourages us to be authentic. It encourages both parties to be autonomous, to stand on their own 2 feet, to be adults, if you will. And if we really want to experience all the kinds of intimacy in life, we have to set aside our projections. We have to puncture all of them and be willing to encounter the unexpected. So if I need you to be Prince Charming, and I hold tight to that projection of you and that expectation of you, you're going to fall short. I'm going to be disappointed. I will be resentful. You're going to feel shame and bad about yourself because you really can't get it right. And by doing that, I'm really narrowing down my experience of you, because I don't get to see all of who you are. And maybe if I drop my projection and my expectation and my assumptions, I start to find out that you're kind of fun in other ways, or quirky or interesting in ways I never dreamt or imagined, because I was too busy holding on to my narrow little fantasy or romance novel view of you. And so we really do ourselves a disservice, and we do others a disservice when we're trying to paint people into a corner of how we'd like them to be, versus really taking a deep breath, dropping all of that, and getting curious, getting deeply curious, because that's how we understand each other and how we understand other people, is through curiosity, not through a foregone conclusion of already knowing someone. When you are willing to be surprised, when you're willing to grow, when you're willing to go with the unexpected and have spontaneous moments of aha, that's when you're more likely to be in relationship with someone and actually find someone that you really want to be with. And I was talking to somebody recently who said they were tasked with going on a blind date, and somebody chose them that they never in a million years would have chosen for themselves. And they ended up having a really good time because they were willing to be curious, and they didn't have the pressure and the expectation on themselves to go out and see what it could be like to go out with a whole bunch of different people, instead of getting really tight and controlling about who you think you should be. So intervening on our predictable narratives is where we want to go with this. If we insist on real information, if we insist on the truth, and we insist on that truth first and foremost from ourselves, that we get out of self-deceit, self-denial, telling ourselves a story about somebody when that story is really not going on at all, and noticing why that mechanism kicks in. I mean, usually it kicks in because we are anxious. And so when we can allow for that sort of openness, we'll start to see people differently. And April says, in all of my relationships, I've projected a need for protection, support, and honesty because of my own childhood traumas and lack of feeling safe. I've accused safe places of not being safe and seen unsafe places as safe. I'm aware of that now, but I still notice the program and projections beginning to play out sometimes when a potential mate presents themselves. I feel like this might take a long time to fully address before being ready for a long-term committed relationship. Okay, so I'm going to pause right there and say this is when a potential mate if you're currently seeing someone, this is a fantastic place to start by saying to that person right now, I just want you to know that I'm starting to feel like I need you to be something other than you are. And I don't want to lay this on you. And I want to be honest about it. And I just know that I have a tendency to get scared in relationships because I, had this situation in my childhood where I was abandoned. And so I have a tendency, to want a man to make me feel safe. And to get into a dialogue with the guy you're dating about this. And he might say, wow, I'm really not your guy because I can't make women feel safe because I hated my mother, in which case you've got a bad situation there. Or he might say, you know what, I want to make you feel safe. So why don't you tell me every time you're not feeling safe, and let's talk about it. And let's see if it's reasonable, right? If you're saying you can't leave the house to go to the grocery store, I feel unsafe, it's not reasonable for someone to say, I can live with that. Then you really do need to work that through. But if it's on occasion something happens and you notice you get scared and you've got a partner where you can say, wow, that just scared me. I know that you're going away for the weekend. I know you have to travel for work. That makes me scared, and it's okay that you're going. I just wanted to tell you. And your partner can say, wow, I can see where that would make you feel scared. How about if I just check in with you every day or text you and let you know that I'm safe and that I care about you? Then you're on the road to healing and having a healthy relationship. So I want to encourage you to use the relationship you're in to heal yourself with and not wait for the perfect guy to do that work with. So you say, I feel this might take a long time to fully address before being ready for a long-term committed relationship. I feel as though I've never truly felt safe in a relationship, so it can be difficult for me to understand how my projections are playing a role in that and how they lead me to choose emotionally unavailable and abusive partners when what I really desire is not that. So that then goes to what I was saying previously, is that I think it's essential for you to talk to the people you're in relationship with from the beginning, from the get-go. Start to let them know, certainly not on the first date, but by the time you start to have sex with someone, before you have sex, you might say, you know what, if I have sex with you, I'm going to get really attached to you. And I have a history of getting scared when I get in relationships with people. And so I need to be honest with you, and I need you to be honest with me. And that is not a one-time conversation. That can be a daily conversation of how are we doing? And you don't want it to be so annoying that the person feels smothered or like they can't take it because it's too much, but you want it to be enough where you feel like, I need reassurance here, and I'm going to be transparent that I need reassurance. And maybe it's just a hug or a text, and that's good enough for you. And you have to do enough work where when the person gives you reassurance, it's got to stop there. You can't keep chasing after them for that, every hour on the hour. That's really when you need to be in therapy and have people in program you can reach out to when you get, dysregulated and unsure. But see if you can start to use your partner for healing yourself. That's what love relationships do for us. That's one of the main reasons for being in them. Let's see, Rick says, I ended a relationship a few months ago because I didn't see the person as putting in the work to alter things that weren't okay with me. They have since begun a program, therapy, etc., and have apologized for their behavior. They want to try it again. I'm leery, but they have good intentions. What should I do? I need to be cognizant of my rescuing traits. Great. All right, so I would recommend that you make a list of all the ways that you rescue women, and particularly the way you rescued this woman. And I would think that you have conversations with her before you become sexual with her again about, what her part was in it. And so that you can see, I mean, you say that she's apologized for her behavior, but you want to see if she's changing the behavior, because it's one thing to say, I'm sorry. It's another thing to do something different. So if you feel like there are a lot of good things in this relationship, like if there is a pros and cons list and the pros outweigh the cons, and you're willing to wade back into these waters with her, you need to do so with caution. And you need to watch her behaviors and not just what she's saying, to see if she's actually making adjustments. And if she does do something that she previously did, does she catch it? Does she apologize for it? Does she own it? Because none of us are going to get this right, immediately. We're all going to do it imperfectly. And if we can do it imperfectly and course correct and apologize as we go along, then eventually we get on track. So use your good judgment, Rick. Make sure you're consulting the people around you that you trust to do this in a way that feels safe for you. And notice your tendency to rescue and fix. And by not doing that, you'll start to change that tendency also. So you have to ask yourself, whose best interest is this? Is it in my best interest or her best interest? Or is it in the best interest of the relationship? But if it's just always in her best interest and you're compromising yourself, that means you're engaging in rescuing behaviors. Someone says, can you please speak further on the signs of a toxic relationship in reference to sabotaging and insecurity specifically? Well, I'm not sure about the second part of that question, but I mean, a toxic relationship is one that leaves you feeling in disarray. It's not additive, it's subtraction. If it makes you feel insecure, unsure, shamed, not lovable, like you're being used, like you're being emotionally abused, like there's nothing about it that feels like it's good for you, and that you keep chasing it out of desperation and out of some need to be needed by just anybody, then you're in a toxic relationship. A relationship that's healthy should be additive. It should make you feel good about yourself. It should make you feel loved and inspired. And like there's pretty much anything that you can do because there's somebody who cares about you, who's got your back. It should make you smile when you think about that person, not have a sense of dread or shame. And when it comes to sabotaging and insecurities, I don't know what you mean by that. If you're talking about self-sabotaging, that you are sabotaging the relationship out of your insecurities, so I don't know exactly what you mean about that. But certainly people can get into relationships that might be good enough or healthy enough. And if you don't believe that the person is really being honest with you when they say that they like you or they're attracted to you, and you're pushing that away, that would be sabotaging by way of your own insecurity. So when you can take compliments, when you can show up in the face of somebody wanting you, and it's not bumping up against your shame, and you're not sabotaging the relationship because you can't tolerate it, then you're in a healthy relationship. But if you keep blowing relationships up because you can't tolerate close-in intimacy, then that is certainly a topic for therapy and something you want to work out in a therapeutic relationship. And that's what good therapeutic relationships do. They allow the therapist and the client to work through these projections as per an earlier question, and to work through whatever happens between the two of them, to get into a real relationship. You know, there was a time when people were working from an idea that therapeutic relationships were symbolic. So I am symbolically your mother, and you're going to project onto me all of the loving motherly qualities that you didn't get. And then if I forget an appointment, or I reach over and drink my water, and you feel offended by that, now all of a sudden you're angry at me because I can't fulfill that projection. That happens all the time in therapy, right? And what we believe in therapy today is that these are not symbolic relationships, they're real relationships. I'm a real person who's really listening to you and taking care of you. And if I offend you or hurt you, then we need to talk about it. Because our talking about it and working through the emotional impact of it is how we learn to be intimate with other people. And intimacy and sex are not the same thing. They are absolutely 100% not the same thing. One of them is about putting your genitals together. The other is about a close-in, open-hearted, body-to-body knowing, deep knowing of each other and conversation and working things out. So if you have a client who's projecting something onto you, or they're idealizing you, or they hate you, then it's the therapist's job to bring that to the foreground and say, hey, let's talk about what's going on between the two of us. Or if there's some, breach between the two, then the client or the therapist can say, wow, we need to talk about what's going on. The client might say, I'm thinking about leaving therapy with you because I think you're mad at me. And I might say, wow, I had no idea you thought I was mad at you. Let's talk about, how did that happen? What happened between the two of us that made you think that? Oh, because I was late last week, you thought I was mad. I can see why you would think that. And then I might say, I'm so sorry I was late. And not an excuse for why I was late. I'm just sorry. And let's see if we can repair what just happened here so we can get closer, not further apart. And I think that's what happens in long-term relationships. People are so afraid to talk about, the unspeakable, the things about you that offend me or hurt my feelings or make me feel unloved or abandoned or like you don't care about me. And so we hold all of that in, and then we inevitably act it out and then blow up our relationships. So isn't it more mature and more respectful for your partner to say, hey, can we have an hour this weekend just to kind of hang out and talk about what's going on in our relationship? Because I've noticed some things. And then talk about yourself. Don't start blaming your partner. Talk about what's going on with you and what you're needing and what you want more of and what you wish you were doing more of in the relationship, so that your partner can open up in the same way. And then you'll find yourselves getting closer to each other. And that would be a healthy relationship, not a perfect one. There's no such thing as a perfect one where people don't talk about anything and nobody's got any problems. That's some weird, romance novel or short TV show where people just aren't real and real life isn't going on. So real information from genuine encounters in the present moment is where you want to be with people, whether it's your therapist, your lover, your brother, your sister, your best friend, your parent. Getting close in and being honest, and not from a mean place or an attacking place, just from a vulnerable place is what builds intimacy between two people. To say, when you said that last week, I want you to know I didn't like it, or it hurt my feelings, or what did you mean when you said last week? That might be a better question. Wow, I took it a completely different way. Can you see why I would take it that way? Oh, sure. Well, I've heard that before about myself. Where both parties are owning what's true for them and where their shortcomings and flaws are. In the past, my partners have gotten very defensive when I try to ask genuine communication about our relationship. No matter how softly I step into it, if a partner is very defensive, how can I handle that? Get out of the relationship. Just say to them, look, you're defensive in a way that makes it impossible for me to get close to you. And that makes me really sad, and it makes me feel lonely and scared in this relationship. So I can't go process my, issues in this relationship with my therapist or my best friend. And if you can't talk to me about it or won't, then I can't actually be in a relationship with you. And that's a tough move, but that is absolutely a move of self-care. It's also saying no. It's saying no to the universe, that I'm not going to be in relationship with people like this over and over and over again. Because the more you say no, the more likely yes will start to show up. And Danielle says, can you elaborate on how toxic relationships and projection show up for people who are being gaslighted and or emotionally abused? How the push and pull of mixed messaging can have a relationship feel both supportive and fun at times, and unsupportive and toxic at the others. For example, my experience is that my toxic relationship experiences were not so black and white, and you described not feeling one is getting anything positive from this relationship. Well, that was someone else who wrote about that they weren't getting anything positive from the relationship. But yes, that's part of the seduction of addiction and addicts, is when you feel like you're being gaslighted and you're being emotionally abused, but the relationship is also supportive and fun at times. And I think that's where self-deceit comes into play, where we put our head in the sand and we don't want to see what we're seeing, because the good feels so good and the bad feels so bad. But to ask ourselves, why do I keep putting up with the bad that feels so bad? Why am I complicit when, and this is a funny thing because gaslighting is subversive and it's emotionally abusive, and there's a little voice in our heads that says, but wait a minute, that doesn't feel right. And what happens that we deny that voice, that we're so willing to hear the other voice that says quickly, but I have so much fun, or he's such a great guy, or yeah, there's, she's so fantastic and blah, 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 but she cheats on me. I know she cheats on me, but we have such a good time with our friends and family. And so it's that small voice that's our intuition. And I have to say, especially for women, we know on some deep level, and that is the voice we want to cultivate for ourselves, and stop giving so much space to the left brain, to our ego, that wants to swoop in and eradicate that voice of intuition and say, you're making things up, or you're making a mountain out of a molehill, or why do you want to disrupt your entire family because you have a hunch that something's not right, as opposed to tracking those hunches and seeing what's going on. And so good, you stop making excuses for the bad behavior and ignoring them. And that's really what you have to do. And I think it's important to practice this one thing, because I notice it quite a bit in myself, and I've really paid attention over the years to getting better at it. And it's that little voice when you're about to walk out the door, and it might be a hot summer day, but you're going out for the night, and there's a voice that says, take a sweater. And you're like, it's 90 degrees out. And you just ignore it. And then you get in your car and you go out, and it's nighttime, and you end up in a freezing cold restaurant where you wish you had your sweater. Or if you live in Southern California, the temperature drops like 10, 15 degrees and it's cold. And you knew it. Your intuition knew what was coming, but the left brain will quickly eradicate it and sweep it out of the way. And that can happen in any number of things, where you're leaving your house and you hear a voice that says, take a food bar, but you're rushing and you don't want to. And then it turns out you didn't have time for lunch at work today, and you wish you had that food bar because now you're starving. So these things play out all the time for us. If we are in our car about to pull out of the driveway and it's like, you should go in and check the stove, or whatever it is, you've all had this experience. Start to do what that little voice says more often than not, and that will become the habit for you. All right, so one way to reel in your projections is to examine the conversations you have with people in your mind. Note the fantasies that you have, and look at the script that you're writing for the other person. And pay attention to how much goes on between our ears, because the mind has no pride. It will think all sorts of ridiculous thoughts all day long, and will even make up what we think somebody else is going to say, as opposed to checking it out with them. And then shake things up a little bit. Get out of your, what I'm calling your pea brain, which are your projections, your expectations, your assumptions. And so when you find your mind, in a stream of irrelevant and imagined thoughts, just focus on your breathing, bring yourself back to the present moment. This is a mindfulness practice, and remind yourself that you don't know what happened. You don't know what the truth is. You don't know what that person's thinking, but you're going to check it out with them. And this act of checking things out with people is one of the premier things you can do to build confidence when it comes to being intimate. The moment you say to your coworker, hey, I just want to check something out with you. Did you take my pen off my desk? Oh my God, I did. I'm so sorry. As opposed to sitting there stewing and thinking they stole it and, making some story about how they're a kleptomaniac. Just ask. See what happens when you start to ask about the smallest things, so that you can start to ask about bigger, more personal, vulnerable things. And then that ties into asking, not assuming. Be prepared to incorporate the new information that you learn from people based on genuine responses and your genuine human interaction. And you will start to see people differently, and you'll be surprised, more importantly. You'll find that people are much more complex and funny and interesting than your small projection or fantasy of them ever was, because that's a one-dimensional coping mechanism, as opposed to getting into, a multidimensional human being who's good, bad, ugly, fun, funny, sad, likable, all the things that we are. So embrace your humanity and embrace the humanity of those around you. And I hope that helps you. I hope this conversation helps you think about love and loving as we walk into this month of February, which we have deemed the month of love. So take good care. I hope you have a wonderful month, and I look forward to talking to you again in March. All right, happy Valentine's Day, and see you soon.